Hi, this is Gus with Jimmy Bean's Wool Fabric, and I want to talk to you today about our little video here. We're going to talk about the Clover Bias Maker. We have two in stock. We have the 1/4 inch and the 1/2 inch. But the 1/4 inch is the standard for if you're doing stained glass quilts or any projects. This is the go-to one that you need to use. And we have two in stock, and let me describe the difference of them. This one has got a little hole in the back here, and you would put this bias tape, that is the sticky tape that you take the paper off, and I'll be demonstrating later on how you use this. This goes with this one. This other one that we have does not have the inset. So this machine, this little green one here, is a 1/4 inch, but you don't have an access to use the sticky tape. There's no you don't need it. You can use pins with this, and this is the easiest way to go, I believe. But if you're a traditionalist, a lot of people don't like using anything like this on their quilts. They like using just 100% cotton and some starch. So it's your choice. And let's talk about how to cut our fabric. Bias has to be on the 45-degree angle because of your fabric giving and the straight of grain. So you take and lay your fabric on your counter, and you get a ruler, and this ruler tells us where our 45 degrees is. You lay your ruler on here. Then I get another ruler and I follow my lines, and because we're going to be doing a 1/4 inch, we need to cut a 1/2 inch strip. And so you line up, and I usually do the back side of the fabric. I take either a fabric pen or any kind of fabric. This is a water-soluble fabric pen that marks. Choose anything you would like and mark your fabric and do strips. So cut on your diagonal until you have all your strips cut, and see the give of your fabric because you cut it on the bias. It has a spring to it. So when you're doing circles or going around the edges, you're going to have more give. If you're doing a project where you don't need that swerve, you can take your fabric and just lay it straight and do a 90-degree angle and just cut your strips in 90-degree increments. And then when you put them together, it's just another way of doing something for your project. So I prefer doing the 45 because I don't know what I'm going to be doing with my bias tape, and I usually make bias tape in rolls. So it's once I have my sewing machine set up, I've got my ironing board set up, I'll make some rolls and I'll put them in a drawer, and they might stay there until my next project. So but the choice is yours. You can use your own fabric, and also on the market they do make bias tape that's already pre-made, and this is usually comes in black, comes in gray, comes in white, and it also comes in the gold lame, and it comes in silver lame also. These are like usually $14, and you're getting 11 yards, and it's a lot easier for you to make it at home with your little bias maker and using your own fabric, and it's a lot cheaper for you. So but if you this is a go-to project if you don't have the time to use the bias maker. But I want to show you today how we can do it ourselves. For the example, I'm going to show you using a 1/2 inch strip. So we did a 1 inch strip, so because this is going to be folded back with the machine, so you're going to have to cut your fabric 1 inch. So we lay our fabric across each other like this, and because we need to have an exact sewing when we're putting both pieces together, I like to pin. So I put 2 pins in, and then I take my little ruler and I do a 45-degree angle, and then I mark my fabric. So I'm going from corner here to corner, and that's going to be my stitching line. Then I take this up to my sewing machine and lay it in the middle, and you need to have this pinned exactly at that 45 because you don't want any excess fabric above or below your sewing line, because when you open that piece of fabric up, it has to be a level piece. If it's zigzag, you're not going to have a nice smooth piece of bias tape. So you need to make sure that you have that on the diagonal and pinned correctly. Okay, so let's sew. And for the demonstration today, I'm using a yellow thread, and I would match my threads if I was doing this for a normal sewing. So you can see that I've sewn on the I've sewn that diagonally. Then you take your scissors, and I do a scant 1/4 inch, and then I open it up and see how it's straight there. And then I cut these little tails off because I don't want to see them. And I would bring this over to my sewing machine and open it up with your fingers and press that seam open. And then when you have your piece done, it is looking straight. Okay, so that's part 2. Okay, we have our bias, and we lay it inside here, and then we take our awl, and this brings the fabric through to the front, and we give it a little tug, and it's already starting to fold over on itself. So we bring our iron up to it, and your iron has to be on steam, the hottest you can get, and that's why this has this little handle, because the steam, as you're pressing along here, this little gadget gets super hot, and it's very easy for you to burn your fingers. So please be careful. Unless you have Teflon fingers, you don't want to be touching that metal because the steam is really intense. So we keep going along and keep going along. And that is your bias strip edge. Another interesting item I use when I'm doing my applique is I use this Clover instrument, and it comes, it's made just for using bias tape and getting in those really nice spots. It gets super hot because you only want to get your tape hot. You don't want to get the fabric hot around it. You want to be able to, if you're using the fusible, you want to be able to have that melted. So I start with one end and lay my bias tape all the way across, and then I start with my hot iron and keep going across like this. And what I try to do is make sure that my ends are covered always on my bias tape. So because my binding I know on the edge is going to cover this, I start over here and go all the way across. If I'm doing a letter like I've done here, I start with this one I'm doing my background design. I start the tape underneath this piece of bias over here, bring it across, bring it down, and I'm going underneath this other piece that's going to go on top. So plan out your design so that your tape ends, your bias is always covered underneath, because there's no way for you to, if it's sitting on top, to finish that elegantly. You might be able to sand stitch it, but it still won't look as nice as if you're doing it where you're having those ends hidden. When I finished laying all my bias tape down, then I use a double needle. And what's nice about the double needle is you have to measure it to make sure it fits your machine. You have to make sure that the throat plate that it's going down into is wide enough for your double needle. You wouldn't want to put this on your sewing machine and look down there and know you only have a single hole there, because it won't work. You have to have a sole plate that fits on the bottom of your sewing machine that the double needle will fit into. And all you do with the double needle is have 2 pieces of thread next to your machine. You bring your thread up in and bring it both of them on either side of your tension disc on your sewing machine. Bring it down the same way, thread it through your whole machine, and I loosen the tension on my top thread by 25% so that it's really loose on top. That way when I'm using the double needle, my thread never breaks. You can also use this with, like with this one, I used gold thread, and you know how gold metallic thread breaks. You need to have a really loose tension on top of your sewing machine, otherwise if it's too tight, your metallic thread will break. So that's another hint, and I think it works just fine. To make this design, I used, I first took my invisible pen and I had to make my wheels. So I took my piece of fabric, laid it on there, and then I took my second piece of fabric, and I knew this was going to sit on top to cover up my loose ends. So the first thing I had to do was decide where my spokes were going to go. So I took a erasable fabric pen and I marked my strokes where I wanted the spokes to come in each time and laid them down. And if you look at this one, there's two sets of spokes. So you can either weave them through like I did at this one. So I did all the way around each time, and then I came back the second time and brought those in. And I'm using the double needle, and you can see how nice and clean that looks, where two pieces of thread are coming through and they're always staying in that same area. So it works pretty well. And then I took the my other size of bias making tape, because I wanted to make a circle, because I have to close in those ends because we want those covered. So I brought that in all the way around and it closed in those ends. And then I made another piece and measured it so that it would close in these ends, and just came in and used just my regular stitch, and when it came as close to the bias edge as I could to make that look like it's a finished edge. So it's easy peasy, it's time consuming, but it's a nice finished product, and I was able to choose my fabric that I wanted to make the bias tape really stand out, and my spokes work for me. So that's the one thing I like about using the bias tape. You can choose your own fabric and it really does a nice job. Thanks, I'm Gus with Jimmy Bean's Wool, and I hope this is helping you today.
Thunder rumbles on this American summer night.